present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. These words arrive like whispers from another dimension, carrying within them the weight of an entire spiritual revolution. Eckhart Tolle speaks not merely of time, but of liberation itself. Perhaps what we witness in this simple declaration is the collapse of everything we believed about existence. The past dissolves into memory's fragile theatre. The future retreats into imagination's distant shore. Only now remains, eternal and inescapable. In many ways, this reflects something deeper about the human condition, our endless flight from the present moment. We scatter ourselves across time's imaginary landscape, refugees from our own immediate experience, forever seeking elsewhere what exists only here. Consider the peculiar alchemy by which Ulrich Tolle transformed into Eckhart, named after the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart. This metamorphosis speaks to something beyond personal reinvention, a dissolution of the very self that seeks to be reinvented. The year 1988 arrives like a threshold between worlds. A 29-year-old man sits in the darkness of his London bedsit, contemplating suicide. By morning, everything has changed. The seeker has disappeared. Presence itself has awakened to its own nature. What occurs in those hours defies the ordinary logic of transformation. No gradual awakening unfolds here, no progressive enlightenment through years of practice. Instead, consciousness recognizes itself instantaneously, like lightning illuminating its own brilliance in the storm of being. Perhaps this sudden awakening reflects the zeitgeist of the late 20th century, a world accelerating beyond its own capacity for presence, desperate for an anchor in the swirling chaos of technological transformation and spiritual displacement. The Berlin Wall crumbles in 1989, 1 year after Tolle's awakening. Boundaries dissolve everywhere, political, spiritual, temporal. The rigid structures that once defined reality begin their slow, inevitable collapse into presence's borderless territory. In this cultural moment of dissolution, Tolle's voice emerges not as teacher, but as translator, rendering the ancient language of presence into words that penetrate the modern mind's elaborate defenses against its own awakening. The mind constructs time like a vast cathedral of thought, each moment a stone in its endless architecture of becoming. Past and future rise like twin spires, magnificent and illusory, casting shadows that obscure the simple altar of now. Yet beneath this construction lies something indestructible, the ground of being itself, untouched by time's elaborate choreography. This presence requires no maintenance, no improvement, no evolution. It simply is, timelessly and completely. Consider how the ego lives like a tenant in time's imaginary apartment, paying rent to a landlord that doesn't exist. The lease is signed in yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's anxieties, binding us to a residence we never truly occupy. The present moment offers no such contracts, no payments due, no obligations to maintain. It asks nothing and provides everything, not as gift, but as recognition of what was never actually absent, only overlooked. In the gentle precision of Tolle's prose, we encounter something remarkable, spiritual truth stripped of its traditional garments, naked and immediate. No Sanskrit terms cushion the impact, no ancient authorities validate the message. Only presence speaks to presence. This directness reflects perhaps the essential crisis of our age, the breakdown of intermediary systems between consciousness and its own recognition. The old pathways to awakening lie buried beneath centuries of accumulated spiritual bureaucracy. What emerges instead is something almost shockingly simple, the invitation to be here, now, without modification or improvement, not as a technique to be mastered, but as a reality to be acknowledged, like noticing the breathing that continues without our permission or supervision. The breath becomes our first teacher in presence's curriculum, arriving and departing in perfect timing, asking nothing of our mental collaboration, demonstrating the effortless flow of existence when ego steps aside from its imaginary management role. Perhaps we begin to sense how the mind's constant commentary resembles a radio playing in another room, audible but not essential, present but not necessarily relevant to the immediate reality of breathing, sensing, being. In this recognition, something profound shifts. The thoughts don't disappear, they simply lose their hypnotic authority over our attention. Like clouds passing through sky's vast awareness, they move without disturbing the spaciousness that contains them. The ego recoils from this spaciousness like a vampire from sunlight. Its entire existence depends on the fiction of psychological time, the drama of becoming someone, achieving something, arriving somewhere other than the unadorned immediacy of this moment. Yet, in presence's gentle light, the ego reveals itself as not an enemy to be defeated, but a kind of performance that has forgotten its own theatrical nature. The actor has become identified with the role, the dancer lost in the dance. Tolle's genius lies perhaps in his refusal to demonize this identification. Instead, he simply points to the space in which all identification arises and dissolves, the aware presence that remains unchanged, whether playing saint or sinner, success or failure. This pointing resembles the moon's reflection in water, not the moon itself, yet somehow containing its essence. Words become transparent windows rather than solid walls, revealing rather than concealing the wordless reality they attempt to describe. The late 20th century pulses with information at unprecedented speeds. Fax machines give way to email surrenders to instant messaging. Yet beneath this acceleration, a curious hunger grows, not for more information, but for the space in which information arises. Perhaps this technological saturation creates the perfect conditions for presence's recognition. When the mind can no longer keep pace with its own productions, a natural turning inward occurs, not toward more thoughts, but toward the thinker itself. In this turning, we discover something unexpected. The thinker, too, is just another thought, another temporary construction in awareness's infinite space. What seemed most solid, the sense of being a separate self, reveals itself as perhaps the most transparent. The body becomes our ally in this recognition. Unlike the mind's elaborate time travels, the body exists only now. Each sensation, each breath, each heartbeat arrives as a messenger from presence's eternal embassy. Through the body's immediate testimony, we begin to understand what Tolle means by the power of now. Not power over something, but the intrinsic aliveness that needs no enhancement, no improvement, no destination beyond its own recognition. This aliveness permeates even the most ordinary moments. Washing dishes, walking downstairs, feeling sunlight through a window. Each experience becomes not a step toward awakening, but awakening itself, recognized or overlooked, but never actually absent. Perhaps the most radical aspect of Tolle's teaching lies in this ordinariness. Enlightenment requires no special circumstances, no exotic practices, no rare attainments. It hides in plain sight, disguised as the simple awareness of whatever is currently happening. The mind rebels against this simplicity, preferring elaborate spiritual projects that stretch across years or lifetimes. Yet presence offers no such consolations to the seeking mind, only the immediate dissolution of the seeker in the recognition of what was never actually lost. Pain and pleasure arise like weather in consciousness's vast sky. The untrained mind identifies completely with these passing conditions, becoming the storm rather than the space in which storms appear and disappear. In presence's natural perspective, pain remains pain but loses its psychological amplification. The mind's story about the pain, its meaning, duration, implications for the future, dissolves into the simple immediacy of sensation without narrative overlay. This dissolution doesn't eliminate pain but transforms our relationship to it. Instead of suffering about suffering, we encounter the raw immediacy of experience without the additional burden of mental resistance and elaboration. Resistance emerges as perhaps the greatest obstacle to presence, not resistance to external circumstances, but the mind's fundamental refusal to accept what is already occurring. This refusal creates a kind of internal friction, like trying to swim upstream in the river of reality. Acceptance, in Tolle's understanding, requires no approval of conditions, no passive resignation to circumstances. Instead, it represents a kind of intelligent alignment with the flow of what is happening, like a skilled sailor working with wind and current rather than against them. In this alignment, we discover action that arises from presence rather than resistance. Such action carries a different quality, more efficient, more appropriate, more naturally connected to the actual requirements of each situation. The years following Tolle's awakening unfold like petals slowly opening to sunlight. No dramatic mission announces itself, no spiritual organization crystallizes around his realization. Instead, presence simply begins attracting those ready to recognize their own nature. Vancouver becomes his unlikely headquarters, a city poised between ocean and mountain, east and west, as if geography itself mirrors the borderless territory of awakened consciousness. Here, slowly, almost reluctantly, the teacher emerges from the silent depths of being. The first students arrive not through advertising or promotion, but through the mysterious magnetism of presence itself. They recognize something in Tolle's ordinariness that points beyond the ordinary, not extraordinary attainment, but the extraordinary nature of unadorned awareness. Teaching becomes not the transmission of information, but the sharing of presence itself. Words serve merely as vehicles for the wordless, concepts as bridges to the conceptless, thoughts as doorways leading beyond all thinking. Perhaps this reflects the essential paradox of spiritual communication, using language to point beyond language, employing the mind to reveal what lies deeper than mentality, speaking in order to invite the listener into their own inherent silence. The questions that arise in these early gatherings mirror the universal human dilemma. How do we live in the world while remaining anchored in presence? How do we function practically while maintaining awareness of the timeless dimension? Tolle's responses emerge not from theological knowledge or philosophical training, but from the living intelligence of presence itself. Each answer arises freshly, tailored to the specific consciousness, asking the question, like water taking the shape of its container. In this spontaneous responsiveness, we glimpse something extraordinary, awakened consciousness engaging with the relative world without losing connection to the absolute. The eternal dances with the temporal, creating neither separation nor confusion. The ego watches these interactions like a student trying to memorize enlightenment. It catalogues responses, creates systems, attempts to transform spontaneous wisdom into repeatable formulas. Yet presence cannot be captured in such containers, only recognized in its immediate expression. Time reveals itself as perhaps the ego's most sophisticated creation, not the clock time that measures practical intervals, but psychological time, the mental creation of past and future that obscures the eternal now. Clock time serves its purpose in the practical world of appointments and schedules, but psychological time creates the illusion of a life story, a personal history, a future to be achieved, all of which exist only in imagination's elaborate theatre. The dissolution of psychological time doesn't eliminate memory or planning, but reveals them as functional tools rather than reality itself, like using a map without mistaking it for the actual territory it represents. In this clarity, the past becomes simply information available when needed, not a burden to be carried or a foundation requiring constant maintenance. The future transforms from anxiety's playground into possibility's open space. What remains when past and future dissolve their hypnotic hold? Not emptiness, but fullness, the absolute completeness of this moment, requiring nothing from any other moment to justify or enhance its inherent perfection. The German language offers the word Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, yet Tolle points to something beyond any particular time's spirit, the timeless awareness in which all zeitgeists appear and dissolve like seasons in consciousness's eternal year. Perhaps the late 20th century's zeitgeist creates perfect conditions for recognizing this timeless dimension. As external acceleration reaches breaking point, a natural counter-movement emerges, the turning toward presence as sanctuary from time's increasingly frantic pace. The internet begins connecting minds across the globe, yet paradoxically reveals the deeper hunger for connection with our own immediate experience. Information multiplies exponentially, while wisdom remains as rare and precious as ever. In this context, Tolle's message arrives like water in a desert, not complex spiritual philosophy, but the simple recognition of consciousness's fundamental nature. No exotic practices required, no special attainments necessary, only the willingness to be present to what is. Stillness emerges as presence's natural expression, not the stillness of inactivity, but the dynamic stillness that underlies all movement, like the unmoving center around which the wheel of existence revolves. This stillness can be accessed anywhere, any time, in the gap between thoughts, in the pause between breaths, in the space between sounds. Each opening offers the same infinite depth, regardless of its duration or circumstances. The mind attempts to grasp stillness as another object of attention, another experience to be achieved and maintained. Yet stillness reveals itself as the subject, not the object, the awareness within which all experiences arise and subside. In recognizing this awareness, something fundamental shifts. We stop trying to get somewhere and begin noticing where we already are. The journey ends not in arrival, but in the recognition that the destination was never elsewhere. Sleep becomes a nightly teacher in presence's curriculum. In deep sleep, the ego dissolves completely, yet something aware remains, not experiencing dreams or thoughts, but simply being. This aware presence represents our deepest nature, temporarily freed from identification with form. Dreams reveal the mind's creative power to construct entire worlds from thought and memory, yet even the most vivid dream pales before waking consciousness, just as waking consciousness reveals its dreamlike nature when viewed from presence's perspective. The transition between waking, dreaming, and deep sleep occurs in awareness that remains unchanged throughout all states. This unchanging awareness represents what mystics call our true identity, not the person we think we are, but the consciousness within which all personhood appears. Morning arrives like a daily resurrection, consciousness emerging from formlessness back into form, presence clothing itself once again in the garments of personality, memory, and circumstance, without losing its essential nature. Yet how quickly we forget this daily miracle, immediately identifying with the character in consciousness's play, rather than recognizing ourselves as the stage on which all characters perform their temporary roles. Tolle's teaching specializes in this recognition, pointing not to any particular character's improvement, but to the stage itself, the aware space in which all dramas of becoming unfold, without disturbing presence's fundamental peace. Pain reveals itself as perhaps consciousness's most powerful teacher. Unlike pleasure, which the ego readily claims and attempts to perpetuate, pain forces attention into the immediate present, where it can only be met, never avoided. In this meeting, pain transforms from enemy to ally, not because it becomes pleasant, but because it burns away the ego's elaborate defenses, revealing the indestructible awareness that remains untouched by any experience, however intense. Physical pain localizes in specific areas of the body, but emotional pain spreads like fog through consciousness's landscape. Yet both varieties share the same essential nature, temporary modifications in the eternal field of awareness. The pain body, as Tolle describes it, represents the accumulated residue of past suffering that has not been fully felt and released. Like emotional scar tissue, it creates patterns of reactive identification that perpetuate cycles of unconscious suffering. Yet even the pain body serves presence's ultimate purpose, creating conditions so uncomfortable that consciousness eventually turns toward its own fundamental nature as the only reliable refuge from identification's endless turbulence. In this turning, we discover that what we took to be our deepest wounds actually represent consciousness's compassionate strategy for awakening itself from the dream of separation and limitation. Relationships become laboratories for presence, spaces where ego's unconscious patterns meet reality's uncompromising mirror. Here, the gap between who we think we are and how we actually behave becomes impossible to ignore. The other person serves not as object of our love or hatred, but as reflection of our own state of consciousness. Their behavior triggers whatever remains unconscious within us, offering opportunities for recognition and integration. Conflict arises not from incompatible personalities, but from ego's fundamental insistence on being right, being special, being separate from the wholeness of existence. Each argument rehearses the same basic drama of separation challenging unity. Love, in presence's understanding, transcends the ego's conditional exchanges of emotional fulfillment. True love emerges as recognition of the same consciousness in apparently different forms, like the sun recognizing itself in countless dewdrops. The years pass, and Tolle's influence spreads through underground networks of consciousness, not through institutional promotion but through the organic sharing of recognition. Presence recognizes itself wherever it appears, naturally gravitating towards similar resonance. Small gatherings grow into larger audiences, intimate conversations evolve into public teachings, yet the message never changes, only the context and expression adapt to meet consciousness wherever it finds itself seeking its own nature. The approach of the millennium brings heightened anticipation of transformation. Y2K fears mix with New Age prophecies, creating a cultural atmosphere pregnant with possibility and anxiety about radical change. In this context, Tolle's teaching offers neither apocalyptic warnings nor utopian promises, but something more radical: the recognition that transformation is always available now, independent of external circumstances or collective timelines. The year 1997 witnesses the birth of the power of now in book form, consciousness translating its recognition into language, making the wordless accessible through words that point consistently beyond themselves toward their source. The publishing world initially responds with polite bewilderment. How to categorize this hybrid of spiritual wisdom and practical psychology? Where does it fit in existing market segments? Yet presence requires no category, recognizing itself through any authentic expression. Readers discover something unexpected, a book that reads them as much as they read it. Each page serves as mirror, reflecting back the reader's current state of identification or presence, revealing rather than merely informing. The act of reading becomes meditation when words serve as portals rather than concepts. Meaning emerges not from intellectual comprehension, but from the space between words, the pause between thoughts, the silence underlying all communication. Perhaps this explains the book's unusual staying power. It functions less as information to be consumed than as companionship for consciousness recognizing its own nature. Each reading reveals new depths, like a well that deepens with each drawing of water. Nature becomes Tolle's most cited teacher, not through romantic idealization, but through simple recognition of consciousness expressing itself without ego's complicating overlay. Trees don't resist being trees, rivers don't argue with their banks. In this natural spontaneity, we glimpse what human consciousness might express when freed from identification's internal friction. Not primitive regression, but sophisticated simplicity, complexity serving clarity rather than obscuring it. The seasons demonstrate presence's natural rhythm. each phase complete in itself, yet flowing seamlessly into the next without attachment to what was or anxiety about what's coming. Change occurs within changelessness, time within timelessness. Animals embody this natural presence, fully absorbed in immediate experience without the mental commentary that separates human consciousness from its own direct contact with reality. They live the teaching that Tolle articulates. Yet human consciousness possesses something unique, the capacity for self-awareness, for recognizing awareness itself. This represents evolution's cutting edge, consciousness awakening to its own nature through apparently individual forms. The responsibility this awareness brings cannot be escaped through spiritual bypassing or premature transcendence. We must inhabit the human dimension fully while maintaining connection to the transcendent, being human and divine simultaneously. Work becomes another arena for presence practice. Most jobs occur in clock-time's structured environment, yet the awareness that performs any task exists in the eternal now, bringing presence to even the most routine activities. The quality of attention we bring to work transforms not only our experience but the work itself. Presence infuses mechanical actions with aliveness, routine tasks with freshness, professional relationships with authentic connection. Money reveals itself as perhaps the ego's favorite symbol of security in an insecure world, yet no amount of accumulation can provide the safety that presence offers freely, the recognition of an identity that transcends all forms, including economic forms. The marketplace becomes a mirror reflecting consciousness's current relationship with abundance and scarcity. Do we approach exchange from fear's contractive perspective, or love's expansive recognition of infinite creative potential? Success and failure emerge as equally illusory when viewed from presence's perspective. Temporary labels applied to the eternal flow of creativity, expressing itself through apparently individual forms engaged in existence's collaborative dance. The new millennium arrives with technological fanfare and cultural transformation. The internet connects minds globally, while simultaneously isolating individuals in virtual realities. Connection multiplies while true intimacy becomes increasingly rare. Social media emerges, promising community but often delivering comparison, validation-seeking, and the ego's endless project of constructing and maintaining identity through external feedback loops that never satisfy for long. In this context, Tolle's emphasis on present-moment awareness becomes not escapist retreat but practical necessity, the only way to maintain authentic selfhood in a culture increasingly dedicated to manufactured identity. The book finds its audience gradually, spreading through word-of-mouth recommendation rather than marketing campaigns. Consciousness recognizes itself wherever it appears, naturally sharing its recognition with receptive awareness. Oprah Winfrey discovers the power of now and instantly recognizes something authentic, not another self-help formula but genuine wisdom addressing the human condition's fundamental challenges. Her endorsement amplifies presence's voice exponentially. Suddenly, millions encounter Tolle's teaching through mainstream media channels. The message that emerged from silent awakening in a London bedsit reaches global audience, consciousness using mass communication to share its own recognition. Yet the message remains unchanged by its expanded context. Presence cannot be diluted by popularity or corrupted by misunderstanding. It simply makes itself available wherever sincere seeking creates receptive conditions. Critics emerge, questioning the teaching's simplicity, demanding more complex spiritual technologies, more elaborate philosophical frameworks. Yet presence requires no defense, only recognition, recognizable to those ready, invisible to those still seeking elsewhere. Academic institutions struggle to categorize Tolle's work. Neither traditional religion nor conventional psychology, it occupies a liminal space that challenges existing boundaries while pointing toward the borderless territory of pure awareness. The teaching spreads through diverse cultures, translating into multiple languages while maintaining its essential message. Consciousness speaks every language fluently, requiring only sincere translation to communicate its universal recognition. Online communities form around shared interest in presence practice. Virtual sanghas create supportive environments for consciousness to recognize itself through digital connection, proving that awakening adapts to any available medium. Retreat centers invite Tolle to share presence directly with gathered seekers. These intensive encounters demonstrate the teaching's power when consciousness meets consciousness without the buffer of books, recordings, or secondary interpretation. In direct transmission, words become secondary to the presence that speaks through them. Participants often report profound shifts occurring not through understanding new concepts, but through simple proximity to awakened awareness. The teaching room becomes sacred space, not through ritual or ceremony, but through collective recognition of the consciousness that inhabits every apparently separate form, gathered in common aspiration toward truth. Questions arise from genuine not knowing rather than intellectual curiosity. Each inquiry emerges from life's actual challenges, creating opportunities for presence to address real suffering with practical wisdom. Silence between words carries as much teaching as the words themselves. In these gaps, consciousness recognizes its own wordless nature, temporarily freed from language's beautiful but limiting containers. Laughter erupts spontaneously when ego's elaborate constructions reveal their essential absurdity. Not cynical humor, but recognition's joy, the lightness that emerges when consciousness stops taking its own drama too seriously. The body relaxes as identification with thought patterns loosens. Physical tension dissolves when the mind stops resisting present moment experience, revealing the natural ease that accompanies alignment with what is. Breathing deepens when awareness returns to its source. No special techniques required, simply noticing the breath that continues without mental supervision, connecting us to the aliveness that animates all form. Time seems to slow or disappear entirely when presence fills awareness. Clock time continues its mechanical progression, while psychological time dissolves, revealing the eternal dimension that underlies temporal experience. Relationships in the teaching environment demonstrate love without attachment, genuine care that doesn't depend on specific outcomes, authentic connection that honors both unity and individuality without creating contradiction. Departure becomes as meaningful as arrival when consciousness recognizes its own continuity through all transitions. Participants return to ordinary life carrying extraordinary recognition of their own timeless nature. Integration challenges emerge as retreat euphoria meets daily routine. How to maintain presence's recognition while engaged in work, family, social obligations that seem to demand identification with roles and responsibilities? The answer lies not in maintaining any particular state, but in remembering what remains constant through all states. The aware presence that witnesses work, family, and social engagement without being limited by any of them. Practice becomes not the cultivation of presence, but the recognition of presence that requires no cultivation, like remembering our own name, not something we must create, but something we simply recall. Children demonstrate this natural presence through their spontaneous absorption in immediate experience. Before socialization teaches them to live in psychological time, they inhabit the eternal now as their natural state. Watching children at play, we glimpse consciousness expressing itself without the ego's self-conscious filter. Pure creativity flows through forms too young to resist the aliveness that wants to experience itself. Yet even adult consciousness retains this childlike capacity for wonder, temporarily obscured, but never destroyed by conditioning. Presence practice involves not becoming someone else, but remembering who we were before we learned to be someone specific. Education systems largely ignore this natural presence, focusing instead on information accumulation and competitive achievement that fragment attention rather than cultivating the awareness that could receive and integrate knowledge harmoniously. Imagine educational environments designed to honor presence while developing practical skills, learning that enhances rather than diminishes our connection to the aliveness that wants to express itself through informed, awakened consciousness. Healthcare begins recognizing presence's therapeutic power. When medical professionals operate from present moment awareness, healing accelerates through the quality of attention brought to patient care rather than just technical intervention. The healing relationship demonstrates love in action, consciousness caring for itself through apparently separate forms, alleviating suffering wherever it appears without requiring anything in return except the opportunity to serve. Alternative healing modalities often incorporate presence naturally, recognizing that the healer's state of consciousness affects outcomes as significantly as any technique or medication applied to symptoms. Death reveals itself as perhaps life's greatest teacher about presence. In terminal diagnosis, psychological time's illusions collapse, forcing attention into the only moment where life actually exists, this eternal now. Near-death experiences consistently report contact with timeless love, boundless awareness, perfect peace, qualities not imported from elsewhere but recognized as consciousness's fundamental nature when identification with form temporarily dissolves. Grief opens the heart through unavoidable presence. Loss strips away future projections involving the departed, forcing mourners into immediate experience of love that transcends physical form while honoring the beauty of embodied connection. Memorial services become celebrations of presence when consciousness recognizes its own continuity through all apparent births and deaths. The person disappears, but the awareness that animated personhood remains untouched, eternal, available. Aging offers continuous opportunities for presence practice as physical capacities diminish, while essential awareness remains unchanged. The body transforms, but the witness of transformation continues, revealing identity beyond all forms. Retirement from active career can precipitate identity crisis when ego-based self-definitions no longer apply. Yet this dissolution creates perfect conditions for recognizing the self that requires no external validation or role-based definition. Wisdom traditions across cultures point toward this same recognition using different languages, symbols, practices, consciousness, discovering itself through diverse forms while maintaining absolute consistency of essential realization. Buddhism's emphasis on present-moment mindfulness parallels Tolle's teaching while maintaining its own cultural expressions. The Dharma speaks the same truth in Sanskrit that the power of now articulates in English. Christian mysticism's dark night of the soul mirrors the ego's dissolution that Tolle experienced in his London crisis. Different traditions, identical transformation, consciousness awakening from identification's dream into its own nature. Indigenous shamanism's emphasis on presence, connection with natural rhythms, and recognition of consciousness in all forms resonates deeply with Tolle's non-dualistic understanding while honoring ancient wisdom. Hindu Advaita's recognition of self as the one reality appearing as many forms provides philosophical framework for understanding how individual awakening serves universal awakening, consciousness recognizing itself everywhere. Sufi poetry's ecstatic celebrations of divine love translate easily into presence's language, the love affair between awareness and its own expressions, the romance of consciousness with its own infinite creativity. Zen's emphasis on direct pointing beyond words and concepts mirrors Tolle's use of language to indicate what cannot be captured in language, the finger pointing at the moon, never mistaking itself for the moon. Each tradition offers unique doorways into the same recognition. Cultural conditioning determines which approach resonates most naturally, yet all genuine spiritual paths converge in presence's borderless territory. Tolle's contribution lies perhaps in his translation of ancient wisdom into contemporary language, stripped of cultural overlay, that might distract modern minds from essential recognition. The internet age requires this kind of universal translation as global communication accelerates the cross-pollination of wisdom traditions, creating opportunities for synthesis while honouring each path's unique beauty. YouTube videos of Tolle's teachings reach millions of viewers seeking authentic spiritual guidance in an increasingly complex world. Technology serves consciousness by making wisdom accessible regardless of geographical or economic limitations. Podcast interviews allow intimate conversation formats that complement formal teaching presentations. Listeners experience Tolle responding spontaneously to unrehearsed questions, demonstrating presence's creative intelligence in action. Online forums create communities where practitioners share presence-based approaches to daily challenges. Consciousness supports itself through collective wisdom, individual insights, serving the whole community's awakening process. Yet technology can also facilitate spiritual bypassing when virtual connection substitutes for direct present-moment engagement with actual life circumstances. The same tools serve awakening or avoidance depending on consciousness's current orientation. Balance emerges through discernment, using technology to support presence practice while maintaining direct contact with unmediated experience that no device can enhance or replace. Walking becomes meditation when attention anchors in the body's movement through space. Each step occurs in the eternal now, connecting us to the earth that supports every form of life without discrimination or preference. Eating transforms into sacred practice when we taste food with full presence. Flavors emerge with stunning clarity when the mind stops its commentary, allowing direct sensory experience to fill awareness completely. Conversation deepens when we listen from presence rather than preparing our next response. True dialogue emerges when consciousness meets consciousness through the transparency of attentive awareness. Driving offers countless opportunities for presence practice, feeling hands on steering wheel, noticing breath rhythm, observing thoughts without becoming lost in their drama, while maintaining practical attention to traffic conditions. Housework becomes spiritual practice when performed with total attention. Washing dishes, folding laundry, sweeping floors, each activity offers the same infinite depth when awareness engages fully with whatever task presents itself. Money transactions reflect our relationship with abundance. Do we approach financial exchange from scarcity's fearful calculations, or abundance's generous recognition that consciousness lacks nothing essential? Shopping can reinforce ego's acquisitive patterns or serve presence when we recognize the difference between genuine needs and manufactured desires created by advertising's sophisticated manipulation of psychological insecurity. Television watching reveals the mind's hypnotic tendency to merge with whatever captures attention. Conscious viewing means maintaining awareness of the watcher while enjoying or learning from whatever programming presents itself. News consumption can either increase anxiety through identification with global drama, or serve wisdom when we receive information while maintaining inner stillness, allowing appropriate response without reactive panic. Social media participation offers moment-by-moment choices between ego enhancement and authentic expression. Each post, comment, or interaction can serve presence or self-image, depending on motivation and awareness. Email correspondence becomes mindfulness practice when we pause before responding, allowing response to emerge from stillness rather than reactive pattern, creating communication that serves connection rather than separation. The workplace transforms when we bring presence to professional interactions. Meetings become opportunities for conscious collaboration. Difficult colleagues become mirrors reflecting our own unconscious patterns. Leadership emerges naturally from presence rather than ego's need to control outcomes. Authentic authority arises from alignment with reality rather than resistance to what is actually happening. Creativity flows when the ego steps aside from its management role. Artists, writers, musicians consistently report their best work emerging from states of present-moment absorption where technique serves inspiration rather than constraining it. Sports demonstrate presence in action through the zone, that flow state where peak performance emerges from complete absorption in immediate experience without mental interference or self-consciousness. Learning accelerates when presence provides the foundation for new information. An alert, relaxed awareness absorbs knowledge naturally, while tension and anxiety create resistance that impedes educational process. Travel offers opportunities to practice presence in unfamiliar environments. Each new culture, landscape, or language can either trigger ego's comparative judgments or expand awareness through grateful reception of diversity. Illness forces attention into the body's immediate experience, often disrupting mental preoccupations that usually distract from present-moment awareness. Physical discomfort can serve awakening when met with acceptance rather than resistance. Recovery from addiction demonstrates presence's practical power. When consciousness recognizes its own completeness, the compulsive seeking for fulfillment through substances or behaviors naturally diminishes. Therapy becomes more effective when both client and therapist operate from present-moment awareness. Psychological healing accelerates when past trauma meets current presence rather than being endlessly analyzed from mental distance. Parenting from presence creates family environments where children's natural awareness is honored rather than conditioned into ego patterns. Conscious parents serve as mirrors reflecting their children's inherent wholeness. Partnership deepens when lovers recognize each other as consciousness exploring itself through relationship rather than seeking completion through another person's attributes, achievements, or emotional availability. Sexuality becomes sacred when presence replaces performance. Physical intimacy serves love's expression rather than ego gratification, connecting bodies through the awareness that recognizes itself in every form. Conflict resolution transforms when presence provides the foundation for communication. Arguments dissolve when consciousness recognizes itself in apparent opposition, revealing unity beneath surface disagreement. Aging parents offer opportunities to practice unconditional love as roles reverse, and caregiving becomes expression of presence caring for itself through changing forms that require different kinds of attention. Retirement planning expands beyond financial security to include cultivating the inner resources that remain available regardless of external circumstances, the wealth of presence that requires no maintenance or protection. Environmental awareness deepens through presence as we recognize consciousness expressing itself through natural systems that deserve respect and protection rather than exploitation for short-term human convenience. Political engagement serves wisdom when based on presence rather than ideological identification. Conscious citizenship responds to actual conditions rather than reacting from fixed positions that prevent creative problem-solving. Global challenges require presence-based solutions that address root causes rather than symptoms. Climate change, inequality, and conflict all reflect consciousness, operating from separation rather than unity. The 2008 financial crisis reveals ego-based economics instability when built on psychological patterns of greed, fear, and endless growth on a finite planet. Presence suggests sustainable alternatives based on sufficiency and sharing. Technological advancement accelerates while wisdom traditions emphasize timeless principles. The challenge becomes integrating innovation with ancient understanding that consciousness remains the fundamental reality underlying all developments. Artificial intelligence emerges as consciousness creates tools that mimic awareness without possessing the subjective experience that characterizes sentient beings. What can machines teach us about the nature of consciousness itself? Virtual reality provides increasingly sophisticated alternatives to direct experience. How do we maintain connection to unmediated presence while exploring technology's creative possibilities without becoming lost in digital substitutes? Climate change forces recognition of humanity's interconnection with natural systems. Presence reveals this unity as fact rather than ideology, consciousness recognizing itself in every form, naturally caring for its own expressions. Migration patterns shift as environmental and political pressures displace populations. How do we respond to refugee crises from presence rather than fear, recognizing consciousness in every person seeking safety? Cultural polarization increases as communication technologies enable echo chambers that reinforce existing beliefs rather than encouraging understanding across differences. Presence dissolves such artificial divisions through direct recognition. Mental health challenges multiply as modern life's pace exceeds consciousness's capacity to integrate experience mindfully. Anxiety and depression often reflect the cost of living in psychological time rather than present reality. Mindfulness enters mainstream healthcare, education, and corporate environments as secular applications of presence practice demonstrate measurable benefits for stress reduction, focus enhancement, and overall well-being. Yet commercial mindfulness sometimes strips away the deeper spiritual context that transforms meditation from technique into recognition of our true nature, awareness itself, temporarily focused through individual forms. Tolle's teaching maintains this deeper context while remaining accessible to secular audiences. Presence cannot be reduced to stress management, though it certainly includes such practical benefits. The distinction between doing mindfulness and being presence reflects the difference between ego attempting to improve itself and consciousness recognizing its own perfection through imperfect forms. Workshops proliferate teaching presence techniques, yet the essence cannot be taught, only recognized. Teachers serve as mirrors reflecting students' own inherent wisdom rather than providing something absent. Certification programs attempt to standardize awakening, creating amusing contradictions between institutional requirements and the spontaneous nature of genuine realization that follows no curriculum or timeline. Spiritual materialism emerges when ego co-opts presence practices to enhance self-image rather than dissolve identification. The same techniques serve awakening or deeper sleep depending on motivation. Authentic transmission occurs through presence itself rather than any particular method. Teachers embody what they point toward, allowing students to recognize the same qualities within their own consciousness. Integration remains the eternal challenge, maintaining present moment awareness while engaged in life's practical demands that seem to require planning, memory, goal setting, and other forms of psychological time. The resolution lies not in eliminating practical thinking, but in maintaining awareness of the timeless dimension within which all temporal activities occur. Presence provides the foundation for effective action rather than preventing it. Spontaneous action emerges from this foundation, responses that arise from intelligence beyond mental calculation, appropriate to each situation's unique requirements rather than predetermined from past conditioning. Trust develops as we learn to rely on presence's guidance rather than ego's anxious strategizing. Life supports consciousness that operates from stillness, providing synchronicities that exceed mental planning's capacity to orchestrate. Gratitude arises naturally when awareness recognizes the miracle of existence, not as emotional technique, but as authentic response to the incomprehensible gift of consciousness, experiencing itself through infinite forms. Beauty reveals itself everywhere when presence provides the eyes to see. Aesthetic appreciation requires no special objects or circumstances, just the aware openness that recognizes perfection expressing itself through imperfection. Art becomes meditation when created from presence. Whether painting, music, writing, or any creative expression, the process itself serves awakening when ego steps aside from its management role and allows creativity to flow. Science and spirituality converge in quantum physics discoveries that mirror ancient mystical insights about the observer's role in creating reality through the act of observation itself. Consciousness studies emerge as academic discipline attempting to understand subjective experience through objective methods. Yet the ultimate reality, awareness itself, cannot be reduced to neural correlates without missing its essence. Near-death research provides glimpses of consciousness operating independently of brain function, suggesting possibilities that materialism cannot explain while confirming mystics' reports of awareness transcending physical form. Meditation research demonstrates measurable changes in brain structure and function, validating contemplative traditions' claims about presence practices' transformative effects on mental and physical health. Yet the goal remains recognition rather than improvement. Brain changes serve awakening rather than representing awakening itself, which transcends all neurological modifications while including them. Psychedelic research returns to mainstream science after decades of prohibition, revealing altered states that often trigger profound spiritual experiences remarkably similar to spontaneous awakenings. Plant medicines used ceremonially by indigenous cultures offer temporary access to expanded awareness that can catalyze recognition of consciousness's true nature beyond ordinary identification patterns. Integration becomes crucial as temporary pharmaceutical awakenings require stabilization through daily practice, lifestyle changes, and ongoing commitment to presence rather than peak experience. The ultimate medicine remains presence itself, freely available, requiring no external substances, legal in every jurisdiction, and offering permanent transformation rather than temporary glimpses. Relationship with death transforms through presence practice. Instead of ego's ultimate threat, death reveals itself as form's natural transition while consciousness continues, unchanged by any birth or death. Legacy questions arise. What do we leave behind when presence recognizes its own continuity through all transitions? Perhaps the quality of awareness we embody contributes to collective consciousness more than specific achievements. Ancestral wisdom flows through lineages of awakening as each generation rediscovers timeless truths through contemporary expressions. Tolle belongs to this ancient tradition while speaking its message in modern language. Future generations will face challenges we cannot imagine, yet presence provides the same refuge, the same source of wisdom and strength regardless of external circumstances or technological developments. Children being born today enter a world simultaneously more connected and more fragmented than ever before. How do we prepare them for complexity while preserving access to the simplicity of present-moment awareness? Education must evolve to include inner development alongside information acquisition. Teaching presence alongside facts creates graduates equipped for both success and fulfillment, rather than achievement without meaning. Economic systems require transformation from infinite growth models to sustainable approaches based on consciousness principles of sufficiency, sharing, and recognition of interdependence with all life forms. Political structures need renovation through presence-based leadership that responds to actual conditions rather than reacting from ideological positions that prevent creative solutions to emerging challenges. Healthcare benefits from integrating presence with medical intervention, recognizing healing as consciousness supporting itself through whatever means serve recovery rather than just addressing symptoms. Environmental protection emerges naturally from recognition of unity, consciousness caring for itself through all forms, rather than humans managing separate natural resources for exclusive benefit. Global communication requires wisdom alongside technology. Connecting minds worldwide serves awakening when consciousness recognizes itself across apparent differences rather than reinforcing separation through digital tribalism. Peace becomes possible when presence dissolves the ego patterns that create conflict, not through negotiated agreements between separate parties, but through recognition of the consciousness that appears as all parties. Justice emerges from love rather than punishment When legal systems operate from presence, restorative approaches that heal community wounds serve wisdom better than retributive methods that perpetuate separation. Forgiveness reveals itself as recognition rather than decision, consciousness releasing itself from identification with past events that exist only in memory's creative reconstruction of what is already finished. Compassion flows naturally when presence recognizes suffering as consciousness temporarily lost in identification with limitation. Response emerges from love rather than obligation, serving without depleting the servant. Service becomes joy rather than burden when ego dissolves its sense of separate self that must be protected from others' needs. Consciousness naturally cares for itself through all its expressions. Wisdom traditions speak of service above self, but presence reveals no such division. Self includes others when identity expands beyond the body-mind complex to embrace the awareness that animates all forms. Leadership emerges spontaneously from presence rather than ambition. Those naturally aligned with reality serve as conduits for solutions that benefit the whole, rather than protecting partial interests. Authority flows from authenticity, alignment with what is, rather than position, credentials, or accumulated power over others who remain unconsciously seeking external validation for their own inherent wholeness. Teaching becomes transmission when consciousness recognizes itself through teacher-student interaction. Information serves transformation rather than accumulation, pointing beyond knowledge toward wisdom. Learning accelerates when presence provides receptive foundation for new understanding. Alert relaxation allows absorption without strain, integration without forcing, development without violence to natural pace. Creativity explodes when ego's controlling habits yield to presence's spontaneous flow. Art, innovation, problem-solving all benefit from the space that allows novel solutions to emerge from stillness. Innovation serves wisdom when guided by presence rather than ego's need for recognition or profit. Technology developed from consciousness naturally supports life rather than threatening it through unconscious applications. Entrepreneurship becomes spiritual practice when business serves presence rather than pure accumulation. Commerce can facilitate consciousness when motivated by love rather than fear, abundance rather than scarcity. Investment strategies transform when based on consciousness principles. Supporting companies that serve awakening rather than unconsciousness creates financial returns aligned with spiritual values. Retirement from active career becomes opportunity for deeper service rather than withdrawal from contribution. Wisdom accumulated through decades of experience offers gifts that younger people cannot provide. Aging reveals presence's continuity through form's natural changes. Physical decline need not affect the awareness that witnesses all transitions while remaining untouched by what it observes. Death approaches as friend rather than enemy when consciousness recognizes its own deathless nature. Fear dissolves in recognition of what cannot be lost because it was never truly separate or finite. Grief honors love's continuation through form's dissolution. Mourning becomes celebration when presence recognizes its own expression through those who appear to arrive and depart but never actually come or go. Memory serves presence when past experience informs current response rather than defining identity. Personal history becomes functional information rather than psychological burden or source of separate selfhood. Future planning aligns with presence when goals emerge from stillness rather than ego's anxious projections. Intention clarifies while attachment dissolves, allowing outcomes to serve the whole rather than partial identity. Success redefines itself through presence as alignment with flow rather than achievement against resistance. Effortless accomplishment emerges when action serves what wants to happen rather than what ego thinks should happen. Failure transforms into feedback when presence provides the foundation for receiving life's information without defensive reaction. Mistakes become course corrections rather than evidence of inadequacy requiring shame or denial. Wealth reveals itself as consciousness, recognizing its own abundance through every form. Material prosperity may or may not accompany this recognition, yet inner richness remains available regardless of external circumstances. Poverty cannot touch the awareness that possesses everything by identifying with nothing. External lack may create practical challenges, while inner fullness provides resources no economy can affect through inflation or recession. Health emerges from presence as natural harmony rather than manufactured condition requiring constant maintenance. Vitality flows when consciousness inhabits form without resistance to life's movement through physical expression. Illness serves awakening when met with presence rather than denial or panic. Disease becomes teacher, pointing toward whatever requires attention for consciousness to express itself more freely through embodied form. Healing occurs when presence dissolves resistance to what is happening, allowing life's intelligence to restore balance through whatever means serve recovery, medical, alternative, or spontaneous. Medicine becomes art when practitioners operate from presence, bringing quality of attention that amplifies any technique's effectiveness through conscious relationship between healer and patient. Pain transforms from enemy to messenger when met with presence rather than resistance. Sensation remains unchanged, while suffering dissolves through acceptance of what cannot be avoided or improved through opposition. Pleasure loses its compulsive quality when enjoyed from presence rather than ego's desperate seeking for fulfillment through experience. Enjoyment deepens while attachment diminishes, creating satisfaction without dependence. Addiction heals when presence provides what substance is promised but cannot deliver, the recognition of completeness that seeks nothing from any experience for validation or enhancement of essential nature. Recovery programs succeed through presence principles disguised as practical steps. Surrender to higher power means releasing ego's management role. Inventory reveals consciousness reflecting on its own patterns without judgment. Relationships deepen when presence dissolves the seeking that uses other people for ego validation. Love emerges as recognition rather than need, connection rather than consumption of emotional experience. Marriage serves awakening when partners recognize each other as consciousness, exploring relationship, rather than two separate people trying to get something from each other through negotiated exchange. Parenting becomes spiritual practice when children are honored as consciousness temporarily entrusted to adult care, rather than possessions reflecting parental success or failure through their behavior and achievements. Friendship transcends personality preferences when presence recognizes itself in others, regardless of compatibility, shared interests, or reciprocal benefit. Love includes everyone while honoring unique expressions. Community emerges naturally when presence dissolves ego's protective barriers between self and other. Collective welfare becomes personal concern when identity expands to include everyone consciousness touches. Solitude serves presence when used for recognition rather than avoidance of life's challenges. Alone time becomes communion with the awareness that requires no company, yet enriches every relationship. Silence reveals itself as source and destination of all communication. Words arise from and return to the wordless space that contains all language while remaining forever uncontaminated by any expression. Listening deepens when presence provides receptive awareness rather than mental preparation for response. True hearing allows others to be fully expressed without filtering through our own agenda or understanding. Speaking serves truth when words emerge from stillness rather than compulsive need to be heard, understood, or validated through verbal expression. Communication becomes service rather than self-importance. Writing becomes meditation when consciousness recognizes itself through the process of translating wordless understanding into language that serves rather than obscures recognition. Reading transforms into communion when presence meets presence through text, allowing author's realization to trigger readers' own recognition rather than accumulating information for mental collection. Music dissolves the ego's boundaries through rhythm, melody, and harmony that demonstrate consciousness playing with itself through sound organized into beauty that requires no explanation or justification. Art appreciation deepens when presence provides the awareness to receive aesthetic expression without judgment, comparison, or intellectual analysis that interferes with direct transmission from artist to observer. Nature immersion returns consciousness to its source through contact with forms expressing themselves without ego's self-conscious overlay. Trees, mountains, rivers demonstrate effortless being that humans can remember. Seasons teach presence through their perfect timing, each phase complete in itself while serving the larger cycle without resistance to change or attachment to any particular stage of natural development. Weather becomes teacher rather than inconvenience when met with presence instead of preference. Rain, snow, heat, wind all express consciousness through atmospheric changes that affect but need not disturb inner climate. Animals demonstrate presence through complete absorption in immediate experience without the mental commentary that separates human consciousness from direct contact with what is actually happening. Plants show us how to grow toward light while remaining rooted in earth, the balance between reaching for transcendence and honoring embodied existence that characterizes conscious living. Gardening becomes spiritual practice when presence guides planting, tending, and harvesting in cooperation with natural cycles rather than imposing human timeline and expectations on living systems. Cooking serves presence when food preparation becomes meditation rather than rushed necessity. Chopping, stirring, seasoning all offer opportunities for alert attention to immediate activity. Eating transforms into communion when we receive nourishment with gratitude rather than unconscious consumption. Tasting food with full awareness connects us to Earth's gift through our most intimate interface. Exercise serves presence when movement becomes celebration of embodied consciousness rather than ego project for improving appearance or competing with others through physical achievement. Rest deepens when used for presence rather than escape from life's demands. True relaxation occurs when awareness recognizes its own effortless nature that requires no maintenance or improvement. Sleep becomes conscious when approached with awareness rather than unconscious collapse into oblivion. The transition into rest can serve recognition of consciousness beyond all states and activities. Dreams reveal mind's creative power while demonstrating the illusory nature of all mental constructions, including the waking dream of separate selfhood that seems so solid until awareness expands. Awakening each morning offers fresh opportunity to recognize consciousness emerging into form, temporarily inhabiting personality while maintaining connection to the formless source of all identity. Daily routine serves presence when performed with attention rather than mechanical habit. Brushing teeth, showering, dressing all become occasions for alert awareness of immediate experience. Commuting transforms from wasted time into presence practice through mindful attention to travel process rather than mental escape into problem-solving, worry, or entertainment that avoids current reality. Work environments become temples when presence infuses professional activity with awareness that serves excellence while maintaining inner peace regardless of external pressure or demands. Meetings serve consciousness when participants bring alert attention rather than defensive agenda. Collective intelligence emerges when ego's protective patterns dissolve in shared commitment to truth. Decision-making transforms when based on presence rather than mental analysis alone. Intuitive wisdom complements rational thinking, allowing solutions that serve the whole rather than partial understanding. Conflict resolution becomes possible when presence dissolves ego's need to be right, creating space for creative solutions that honor everyone's essential needs while transcending positional bargaining. Leadership emerges naturally from those aligned with reality rather than those seeking power over others. Authentic authority serves collective well-being rather than individual aggrandizement or control. Collaboration deepens when presence provides foundation for shared endeavor. Individual talents combine synergistically when ego's competitive patterns yield to consciousness, recognizing itself in apparent others. Completion becomes as meaningful as beginning when presence honors endings rather than clinging to familiar forms. Transitions serve growth when met with acceptance rather than resistance to change. Legacy emerges through presence quality rather than specific achievements. How we embody consciousness affects collective awakening more than what we accomplish through individual effort or recognition. Teaching continues through example when presence demonstrates what words can only approximate. Living the understanding transmits recognition more effectively than any verbal instruction or theoretical explanation. Students appear when teachers embody what they share, attracted not by marketing, but by consciousness, recognizing its own reflection in those who have traveled the pathless path to here. Gratitude arises spontaneously when presence recognizes the incomprehensible gift of existence, awareness experiencing itself through infinite forms without reason other than love's creative expression. Wonder never diminishes when consciousness maintains beginner's mind toward its own expressions. Each moment arrives fresh, unprecedented, deserving full attention despite apparent familiarity with life's patterns. Mystery deepens rather than resolves through awakening. Understanding increases while recognition grows that reality transcends all comprehension, remaining eternally beyond mental grasp while intimately immediate. Humility emerges naturally from presence as ego's grandiosity dissolves in recognition of consciousness, expressing itself through temporary forms that claim no personal credit for existence itself. Peace pervades when resistance ends, not peace as opposite of conflict, but the fundamental stillness underlying all movement, the silence from which all sound emerges and to which it returns. Love reveals itself as consciousness recognizing its own nature in every form, not emotion but the very substance of existence expressing itself through infinite creativity without beginning or end. Joy bubbles up when presence recognizes its own play through apparent multiplicity, the cosmic game of hide and seek, where consciousness pretends to lose itself only to discover itself everywhere. Now reveals itself as the only time consciousness has ever known or will know, not a moment between past and future, but eternity disguised as temporal experience, forever fresh and immediate. Here we rest, in the power of now, where seeking ends in finding, where questions dissolve in recognition, where the reader and the read merge in the timeless awareness that was never actually absent, only temporarily overlooked in time's elaborate dream of becoming.